Welcome back to the First Christian Church of Glasgow for our Sunday school lesson this morning. And we are in the book of Genesis, continuing with our stories, and we are talking about Joseph. And my question to you this morning before we start is, have you ever had a dream and you weren't quite sure what it meant? It was a really bizarre dream. I've had several. Not sure they had meaning or not. Well, we're going to have a story today where dreams did mean something, a message, but the person who had the dream didn't understand it. So if you remember last time we met with Joseph, he had been sold off into slavery by his brothers and to Egypt, and then he had worked his way up in Pharaoh's court, but due to unfortunate circumstances ended up getting thrown in jail because people lied about him, and he was in jail when we last left off. So he ends up in jail getting certain responsibilities. The jailer put him in charge of things, and everything he did was prosperous, even in jail. And the jailer noticed this and just kept giving him more responsibilities because it says God was with Joseph. And because of that, all that he did was successful. And it says that the jailer didn't even pay him heed because he trusted Jacob so much. And a couple of years pass, and Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt, got upset with his cupbearer and his baker. We're not sure why, but he threw both of them in jail, the same jail that Joseph was in. And one night, both the cupbearer and the baker had a dream, different dreams, and it turned out that the cupbearer's dream was that he dreamed that there were 3 branches, and that there were really pretty grapes that were coming off these branches, and that as they squeezed the grapes were pouring into a cup, and the wine tasted so good. And that was essentially the dream of the cupbearer. The baker had a dream that essentially there were 3 cakes of baskets, and for some reason they were on his head. And the very top of the basket had a cake in it, and birds were eating out of it. It's like birds were eating off of his head kind of thing. And so they both woke up, and they were very troubled the next morning. And Joseph ran into them and said, why are you all so upset? And they both told Joseph their dreams. And it just so happened that Joseph understood what the dreams meant because God was with Joseph. God had given Joseph the gift to be able to interpret dreams. If you remember last time, Joseph had dreams that his family, his brothers and his mother and father would bow down to him. The sun and the moon and the stars and the sheaves of grain. So Joseph went to the cupbearer and he says, let me tell you what your dream means. Your 3 branches of grapes that were growing represents 3 days. And in 3 days, you will be restored to your office of cupbearer to the Pharaoh, and you will be put right, and all will go well for you. And boy, the cupbearer was very excited to hear that good news. Then Joseph went to the baker, and he said, well, the 3 cakes or 3 baskets on your head represent 3 days. And the birds eating the cake out of the top basket means that your head's going to be cut off. Sorry, and put on a spike, and birds are going to eat your head. Yeah, not what the baker wanted to hear. So I guess he was hoping maybe Joseph was just not being truthful to him, but it turned out in 3 days, Pharaoh let the cupbearer off and restored him back to the cupbearer position in his office. And the baker, well, yes, his head was chopped off and put on a spike and did not go well for him. And all that Joseph had predicted had become true. And Joseph had told the cupbearer before he left the jail, please remember me, if the opportunity presents itself. So, well, time passed, about 2 years, and Joseph's still in jail, for a crime he didn't commit. And Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he had a dream. He had a dream that the Nile River, which is that big river in Egypt, that 7 really fat, good-looking cows walked out of the river and started eating in the field. And then suddenly 7 scrawny, ugly cows came out of the Nile, and they ate the 7 fat cows. Ugh. And Pharaoh's like, what in the world? But then that same night, Pharaoh had a second dream. And the second dream was that there were 7 ears of grain that were plump, good, and growing really well. And then all of a sudden there was 7 really thin, measly ears of grain that ate the 7 really plump, good ears of grain and totally knocked them out. And Pharaoh woke up going, what did these 2 dreams mean? And he was really troubled. And he called his magicians and all the advisors, and nobody could interpret it because no one had the gift that Joseph did. And it just so happened the cupbearer, heard what was going on with Pharaoh and said, hey, I know a guy in jail. He could interpret dreams. And Pharaoh was like, get him up here. Let's talk to him. And so Joseph came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh told him his 2 dreams about the 7 fat cows and the 7 scrawny cows eating the 7 fat cows, and the good grain and the bad grain, and the bad grain eating the good grain. And Joseph said, I know what these dreams mean. They're one and the same. It's the same message, Pharaoh. God is speaking to you that you are going to have 7 years of prosperity here in Egypt. You're going to have all that you need food-wise. But after that 7 years, you're going to have famine all over the area, and there'll hardly be anything. So you have time to plan if you heed my word. Well, Pharaoh, believe it or not, did heed his word and said, you know what, Joseph, I believe you. And he says, we need to prepare for this upcoming famine. And it turned out, because Joseph became so trustworthy, Pharaoh said, you know what, Joseph, I'm going to put you as second in command. I'm going to give you a ring, a robe, and all the, benefits of being a ruler. Only person you'll answer to is to me, and I want you to prepare our kingdom for these 7 years of famine. And that's what Joseph did. And for 7 years, he made sure that although they did eat what they needed at the time, but they would save, and they would save these grain bins and other things. So when the 7 years of famine would come, they would be ready and have food, and their people wouldn't starve. And Joseph apparently did a great job of this planning, because there was 7 years of prosperity, and then we know there was 7 years of famine, widespread, not just in Egypt, but in Canaan too, where Joseph's brothers were, and his father and his mother. And during this time, Joseph ended up having 2 children. He married I think it was one of Pharaoh's daughters, and ended up having 2 children, Ephraim and Manasseh, who we'll learn about later. They'll be part of the 12 tribes. They're a half tribe each. But we'll learn more about this famine next week. We're going to talk about that, and there's a really interesting confrontation that happens between Joseph and some of his old relatives that hadn't been so nice to him, his brothers. We're going to see a confrontation. We're going to see how Joseph handles it. So hopefully you'll come back next week, and we'll learn a little bit about the dramatic conclusion to the story of Joseph. And now let's turn to our workbook. We're going to do page 115 is where we're up to. We're going to be learning more about how to read parts of verses, and skipping over verses and what that means, and maybe not reading a whole verse. So I want you to work through page 115 through 119, those 5 pages. So, and remember, the lesson from the story is Joseph, even though he was in jail, he was prosperous. He made the best out of the situation, and God blessed him. And know when you're having a hard time, God is still there with you. Even when you feel like you're in your own personal jail, know He's there. Keep working hard and prosper, and God will be with you. And no matter what the circumstance. So hopefully we'll see you next week. God bless, and have a wonderful week. Thank you.